So I'm so excited for tonight. Glennette Tilley Turner is a dear friend of the library, and we are so excited to be offering this program in support of her new book in partnership with Abrams Publishing and the Bookstore of Glen, Ellyn. So right now I'm going to hand it over to Shannon Burgess of the Bookstore of Glen, Ellyn.
Thank you so much. Glennette, so good to see you. I am so happy to introduce these two extraordinary women that we have the privilege of hearing from tonight and having a conversation with. They've both spent their careers and their lives teaching and writing the stories that need to be told. Stories that are so important, but might have been lost to history if not for their scholarship, their talents, and their persistence. Because of their dedication, these important historical figures are now known and taught and read throughout the country and throughout the world. So tonight, we are here to celebrate the launch of Glennette's new book, A Man Called Horse. And if you haven't purchased it, we'd love to support Glennette and get more of these out in the world. And they are signed by her. And I'm just going to show you a little bit of the inside because it is just gorgeous. It is such a beautiful book and such an amazing story. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Glennette. She has written 12 children's books, including Fort Mose. Is it Fort Mose or Mose?
Mose.
Mose. Thank you, Glennette. I should remember that by now. An Apple for Harriet Tubman, Running for Our Lives, and Lewis Howard Latimer. She has also written collective biographies of notable African Americans, and she served as an advisor to the National Park Service on the National Railroad. Turner has a master's degree in history and children's literature, and she has spoken at a lot of places, including the ALA, the NCTE, the BCALA, and the Library of Congress. She has presented at Illinois Library Historical and Reading Organizations, and she is a retired elementary school teacher who lives right here in our backyard. She has received numerous awards and accolades for her writing, and she was inducted into the International Literary Hall of Fame for Writers of African Descent at the Gwendolyn Brooks Center of Chicago State University. She lives in Wheaton, Illinois. So tonight we're going to have a conversation. Glen is going to have a conversation with another extremely impressive woman who is also in our own backyard, and her name is LaVonne Brown Ruoff. LaVonne is a professor emerita, yes, of English at the University of Illinois at Chicago, where she developed the Native American Studies program. She is also the former interim director of the Darcy McNichol Center for American Indian History at the Newberry Library. In 1994, 89, 83, and 79, she directed the summer seminars for college teachers on American Indian literature, which were sponsored by the National Endowment for Humanities. She received an NEH grant in 1981 and a fellowship in 92 to 93. And she was a fellow at the University of Illinois at Chicago's Institute for the Humanities. She there was an international conference held in her honor in France. It was called Before Yesterday, The Long History of Native American Writing. And in 2002, she was only the second woman to receive the Modern Language Association's Lifetime Scholarly Achievement Award. I could go on and on and on about all of her accolades, just so impressive and so important. She received a 1998 Lifetime Achievement Award from the American Book Awards, and which was presented by the Before Columbus Foundation, and also she has received twice the Native Writers and Storytellers Woodcraft Circle Award. So LaVonne has many, many publications, and has books and articles and all sorts of scholarly work. She's also received all of her degrees at Northwestern University. She has a BS in education and an MA in English and a PhD in English Romanticism. She was on the faculty of University of Illinois at Chicago and also taught at Roosevelt University. So I think what an expert to have this conversation with. And without further ado, we are all here to hear from both of you. And I now am very pleased to present Glennette Tilley Turner and LaVonne Brown Ruoff in conversation.
Well, thank you. Excuse me, if I may say, I feel so honored that LaVonne is not only interviewing me, but LaVonne played an important role in the publication of the book. She followed the story and my experiences all the way through and read the manuscript with care. And I just feel so pleased. And also want to thank our AUW group, because it was through our group that the two of us met.
Well, thank you so much. You're very generous. I'm very proud to be a little bit a part of that book, which I think is very important. And I think your work generally, particularly geared to young readers, is very important. Shall we begin the discussion?
Yes.
Okay. Well, let me ask first why you decided to write, excuse me, why you decided to write this book for young people,
Well,
to adults.
Well, it's because it's a book I wish I had had. Our family lived in St. Augustine, very near where John Horse was born, and I didn't hear any word from a teacher nor read a word in the textbook all the time that I was in middle school in St. Augustine. And so I'm just delighted to learn this information and to make it available to young people. I did hear vague references to the fact that some Indians, in quotes, had escaped from Castillo de San Marcos, but never heard an account of what happened. And I'd like to just read what an exciting and involved remarkable story it is. John Horse and Wildcat, who was Native American Seminole chief, spent weeks filing the rusty iron bars blocking the 8-inch opening at the top of their 8-foot cell. They fasted for 5 days to reduce their girth, and on the moonless night of November 29th, 1837, John, Wildcat, and 18 other prisoners squeezed through the opening, shimmied down the fort's rocky exterior on ropes made from mattress bags, and disappeared into the night. Now, that's a story that would have captured my imagination when I was in junior high. But really, to go back to your point about the readership level or the readership for the book, I really just think inquiring minds want to know, and they never outlive that desire to know. So any age reader will learn and enjoy this information as much as I.
Well, I'm glad you're doing that, and I encourage more authors to do that. You have quite a few books for very young children, but the middle school years is neglected. And I think it's so important when there is vital information available that we make it possible for young people to read. Yeah. Now, I wonder if you could tell us a little something about who the Seminoles were and who the Black Seminoles were, because that's two different terms.
That's true. In the 1700s, many lower creeks broke away from the upper creeks and emigrated to Florida from Georgia and Alabama. the breakaway Native American group became known as the Seminoles. They were accompanied by a smaller group of Black people who were called Black Seminoles. They were descendants of Seminoles, free Blacks, and runaway slaves, and had previously been held in chattel slavery, where they were treated like property and had no rights. This Seminoles practiced a form of slavery that was mutually beneficial to themselves and to the Black Seminoles. Although they used the word master and slave, in reality, they were protectors of the Black Seminoles. And in exchange for this, the Black Seminoles paid a token share of their harvest. Otherwise, they lived as free people.
All right. Well, that helps us keep them straight because they very much are two different groups, related but not related. All right. How can you tell us a little bit about Horse's background, his parents, and what his people worked with?
Well, John was born in Alachua, Savannah, just west of St. Augustine. His original name was Juan Cavallo, and his father was Seminole tribesman Charles Cavallo, and his mother was of African and Native American descent, but her name is unknown.
Okay. Anything else you want to say about his heritage or its influence on
I
him?
wonder if you'd like to elaborate on the root word for horse.
Oh, yes.
His name.
Oh, well, you kind of get a combination of a Creek word and a Spanish word, cavalry and so on. So I think that's important in terms of understanding because he is growing up where there are many different languages and different varieties of Creek and so forth, and Spanish and also English. So it's quite a multilingual environment that he's growing up in. And he's quite adept in these languages, and that's important too. Now, can you give us just a brief overview before we get into some of the details about what you think are his major achievements as a leader and a negotiator?
Well, he really was a negotiator and an interpreter when the Seminoles were ordered together in Tampa to await removal from Florida. He and the Seminole chief Wildcat organized a mass escape. Then it was after that that he and Wildcat were imprisoned at St. Augustine at the Castello de St. Marcos. And then after their escape, he led a large contingent of Black Seminoles to fight at the Battle of Okeechobee. After that, the battle was Christmas Day, and the Seminoles were very outnumbered and really were very masterful in their use of warfare. As a matter of fact, my favorite picture in the book is this one, the Battle of Okeechobee. And sure. Well, when you have your own copy of the book, you'll see it closely. But really, it's just a remarkable battle. Following that, John and the other Seminoles went to Oklahoma. And subsequently, he returned to Florida as an army guide and interpreter. And it was said that he could follow a trail by moonlight at a gallop over a burnt prairie, talk English, and supply any quantity of gopher, which is turtle, at an hour's notice. He made multiple trips to Washington, D.C. as a negotiator. And then John Horse and Wildcat led their people to Mexico, where slavery no longer existed. John's followers were called Muskogos in Mexico. And then he remained in Mexico until the United States Army invited the Muskegos to return to the United States to protect the border of Texas. And the Negro Indian Seminole Scouts were formed. John served as an advisor to the man who had been his second in command. Then eventually he returned to Mexico and assumed leadership. And his very last effort on behalf of his people was to take an 800-mile journey to Mexico City to secure a home for them.
Mm. Well, we could say that he was a distinguished leader, a fierce fighter, and brilliant negotiator, and he was a man on the road to long journeys. Perhaps I might say a word or two about Indian Territory and what the situation was there, as a way of explaining why the Black Seminoles moved to Indian Territory and then left. That was the area which is now Oklahoma, which the government had set aside when it was removing, and that was the term that was used, removing Indians from east of the Mississippi. Illinois tribes were moved to Oklahoma. The ones from the south, particularly, were moved. It was a long, hard journey, and thousands of Indians died along the road because they didn't provide much in the way of food and certainly not transportation. Except for the very old, these people walked from, say, Georgia, clear across Kentucky, and across the river into Missouri. But now the situation there was that the major tribes that were removed, particularly in one section of Oklahoma, were called the civilized tribes, and I'm putting quotation marks around civilized. These were tribes that had persuaded themselves that if they adopted the system of government that the United States has, with the equivalent of a Congress and the equivalent of a Senate, that they would be all right. And if they were educated, could speak English, their children were learning English. Many of them also learned their native language, and there was even a written Cherokee language. But when the Civil War came, there was a great split between those who fought on the side of the Confederacy. Over 7,860 Native Americans from Indian Territory participated in the Confederate Army. In 1880, an account in the Philadelphia Inquirer in 1884 said that nearly all the Seminoles fought on the side of the North, which was unusual. And I've done some research with the Creeks down there, so I'm very aware of that. But the racial differences between the two were very pronounced. Most of the civilized tribes had slaves, and they tried to enslave these Black Seminoles who came from Florida. And they were not having any of that. That's why they left Indian Territory and went to Mexico. Later, they tried to come back, but it was still the same situation. So that's important to keep in mind. Now, that racialism continued down. I can remember when some Creeks were running for office, and there were one Creek would attack his opponent because he was part black, whether he was or was not, and vice versa. So that continued. And that is still a major issue. There was a long article in the New York Times just about a week ago, because one of the problems that the Indian nations are facing down there is that the birth rate is fairly high among Indian nations, and there are more of them than there used to be. But there are more people who were either part Indian, more African American, who were part Indian or were raised in, say, the Cherokee territory. Many of them speaking fluent Cherokee, and the problem of the dispersal of funds is a real issue. And some of those people who are living down there, they're called freedmen. That's what they were called when the United States insisted that these freedmen be taken into the tribes and given tribal status. And the tribes have been trying to negotiate a different approach to that. And I'm not taking sides one way or another, but it is a hot issue down there. Any question about that? So the battles are not over, I guess what I'm saying.
The story continues.
Yes, yes, it does. Yeah, yeah. Now, did you want to tell us about his final years?
Well, I'd like to, but before that, I'd like to talk about how he got his nickname. He was sometimes called
Yes, absolutely.
Gopher John. And this is because he was really a very clever and mischievous kid. When he was 14 years old, his family lived quite near an army camp, and he and his mother lived near an army camp. He was a wonderful hunter and trapper, and one day he put two turtles in a bag and took them to the army camp and asked to speak with Lieutenant Colonel Brooke. And then he opened the bag, and Brooke was delighted because he really just loved turtles, which were also called gophers. And so he paid John for the two turtles and asked him to bring turtles every day because he'd like to have enough for a great turtle feast. And John did bring two turtles every day, but he had retrieved those two turtles the night before and brought the same two turtles back and was paid for them. And of course, when the colonel became aware of what John had done, he was livid. And yet, John was clever enough to convince him that he'd just been playing a prank on the cook, and that he could bring all the turtles if the colonel wanted. And the colonel relented, and so that's how he got the name Gopher John. To answer your question about the end of his life, he was in Texas during the time the scouts were there, but then he and one of the scouts were shot at, and the scout was killed instantly, and John was injured, and his horse was injured. And after he recovered from that assassination attempt, he returned to Mexico, where he was really a kind and respected patriarch. And there was a land dispute, ongoing land dispute about the land of the Muskegos. And who other than John Horse, there was no one other than John Horse who was qualified to, go and speak on behalf of the Muskegos. And so he set out on this journey on horseback. But prior to that, he was bid farewell by the Kickapoos, who had accompanied Wildcat and John Horse when they first went to Mexico. And the Kickapoo chief said, "We are coming to give you our final farewell because we don't think you will return from this trip." And his predictions were true. John died in Mexico City, but he succeeded in his goal to assure lands for his people.
Well, he was a very clever man, it seems to me, and showed it in that what should we say? Game he started with the turtles,
Mm-hmm.
and that kind of insight and cleverness, I think, defined him as he grew older, which made him such a good negotiator, because he could see the ends of where things were going, and you needed somebody there to do that because the government was not negotiating in good faith. Yeah. Anything else you want to tell us about him?
No, I just really think that I'll say the rest of the story is in the book.
Ah, yes. And I want to compliment the press for the job that they did on this book, because would be wonderful teaching device. It has a chronology in the back there. It has wonderful illustrations all the way through. I think that would keep little children reading. And do you want to say a word or two about the group that formed Texas militia? What do they call them now? The Seminole Negro Indian Scouts.
Oh, the scouts were remarkable. They just really did all kinds of impossible things. Well, there were just many accounts of their ability to travel long distances and to fight when they were and succeed when they were outnumbered. They did just dramatic rescue of their leaders. And then there was a story called of time that they had traveled long distances, and there was just no water that could be found anywhere, and the men were just parched for the lack of water, and really would have died. And then one of the scouts was able to detect water far under the ground and found a spring, and they named it Salvation Springs. But I just think it's just an example of how resourceful they were.
Well, the scouts were involved in the capture of Geronimo.
Mm.
Yes, because they were such good trackers.
They were.
Yeah, they could track where the regular army people or could not. So that was something special that they could do. Yeah. All right. Any other points you want to bring up with about?
Well, there's a section. I just found so many other stories in addition to the John Horse story. I had the distinct honor of meeting a descendant of John Horse. His name was Dove Warrior. He was the chief of the John Horse band, and just a wonderful man. Both he and his wife, Miss Ethel, died this past year, but he was so supportive and interested in the book, and felt so honored that his ancestors' story was being told. And this is a picture that I'm very proud of, where I had an opportunity to meet him at a conference at the National Underground Railroad Network to Freedom held in St. Augustine, Florida. And he was just so very supportive of the work. And there are stories of really the continuing legacy of John Horse, both in Mexico and Florida and the Bahamas and Cuba. Just really a wonderful continuity of the John Horse legacy. But then there's a section called about the rest of the story.
Oh,
and
yes. Yeah.
A picture of a woman by the name of Joanna July. Women played an equal role to men in the Seminole community. One well-known Seminole was Joanna July. She was born in Mexico, and by the early 1870s, she and her family had resettled near Eagle Pass, Texas. She learned to tame horses for the U.S. Army and area ranchers, and she preferred to ride horseback with only a rope around the horse's neck. Wearing ropes of beads, gold earrings, and colorful clothes, July was soon famous throughout the area as an expert horsewoman. July had a unique method for taming horses. She would lead the animals into the Rio Grande and climb onto their back. the bucking horse would grow tired from both having to swim and trying to get July to get off its back. Soon it would lose its strength to buck, and July would ride it back into dry land. She married a Seminole scout named Leslie and went to live with him at Fort Clark. However, she yearned to be with her horses, and not long after the wedding, she left Leslie and returned to her mother's house near the Rio Grande. She died in 1930s.
That's a wonderful story. The idea of her going into marriage, trying it for a while, not feeling that it was doing much good for her life, and then going back to training her horses. That's a wonderful story. Yeah. Anything else you would like to add to our narrative?
No, except that I just really so enjoyed the writing of the book and all the people that I've had an opportunity to meet, and starting with the publishers and then meeting Dub Warrior and the many other people who are so involved and for whom John Horse has so much meaning. And so it's just been a wonderful journey for me.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, I thank you so much for writing such a splendid book. And now I think we might turn to the question period.
Thank you both so much. So if anyone has any questions for Glennette or LaVonne, you can put them in the Q&A or the chat. We'll be keeping an eye on both. Our first question, Glennette, I think you may have touched on this, but did John Horse's relatives see the book to publication?
Oh,
I was able to send him the last pass, as the editor called it, the fourth pass. So he didn't see the bound book, but he saw how beautifully designed it was and how the colors are the Seminole colors of red, black, yellow, and red, black, yellow. red and white and black and yellow. Was there. So Dub was able to see the finished product in every form, except that he didn't see the bound copy. But he knew that he was one of the people that it was dedicated to, and it was just wonderful. Thank you. Did I answer the question? I got so distracted saying the names of saying the colors that I kind of threw myself.
So it sounds like they did not live to see the bound final book.
He didn't see the final book, but he saw just this close.
Oh, that's too bad. And there were no other living relatives that you know of out there?
No, but there is a chief who is now the chief of the John Horse Band. And then there's a museum in Brackettville, and they will be doing a dedication of 2 trees, one for Mrs. Warrior and one for Chief Warrior next year. And so there is continuity.
and they're still having gatherings, aren't they?
Oh, yes, they had Seminole Days this year.
Yeah, yeah.
With tradition. As a matter of fact, it's I visited Dub Warrior and his wife in Del Rio, Texas, and it's the same Del Rio that was in the news so recently with the people from Haiti who were seeking admission to this country. There's modern day history being made in that same area.
And Glennette, how long did it take you to write the book?
A long time. I think really I was working on it, and 2010, I think is when I started working. It finally came to, it finally materialized, and it was just all and more than I could have hoped for.
So definitely a labor of love.
Mhm.
Our next question, thank you for writing this book. The book is so beautiful. What do you hope young people will learn from knowing John Horse's story?
I think to never give up and to have faith in yourself, and also to have skills, to develop your skills and really utilize them.
I think the ability to keep going despite attacks and adversity is so essential. Because I work in American Indian Studies. I was married to an Indian. One of my 2 adopted children is Indian. And what you realize over the long term is that it doesn't end. You always have to be prepared for the next incursion, trying to take your rights or whatever. So the battles never end.
And when did you first hear of John Horse?
Professor Joe Apollo was an advisor when I was writing Fort Mose, and when I was wanting to write another book, and really wanted something that was related. Having lived in Florida, I was really, and having had an ongoing interest in the Underground Railroad, I was interested in the Underground Railroad, but amazed to find that Fort Mose in Florida had been like the promised land for people who were enslaved in South Carolina. We think of Canada as being, the destination for the Underground Railroad. But then St. Augustine was, and Fort Mose were the Florida destination. So Professor Apollo said, "Why don't you write about John Horse?" And I had not known of John Horse, as I mentioned earlier. And so it just set me on a quest that was just relentless, and I thoroughly enjoyed the adventure.
And how were you able to learn so much about this subject matter?
Well, I had been, as Shannon mentioned, an advisor to the National Park Service on the Underground Railroad, and the Midwest director. Well, one of the things that our committee or our commission did was to form the national, or to recommend the National Underground Railroad Network to Freedom program be formed, and Congress passed it, and I had the great honor of going to the signing of it. Senator Paul Simon of Illinois was the person who wrote the legislation to so that the Underground Railroad would be studied. And then our committee recommended the establishment of the National Underground Railroad Network Freedom Program. And Senator Simon and Senator Carol Moseley Brown, really shepherded it through Congress, and I had the pleasure of going to signing. I just remind me of the rest of the question. I got.
Just how you were able to learn so much about the subject matter and John Horse.
Dee Johnson, who has been the Midwest director of the Network to Freedom, really was the person who really just put me in touch with such wonderful and very little known resources, and both people and documents. And I really felt that she, was so instrumental in setting me in the right direction. And then as I attended the conference in St. Augustine and met Dub and Phil Fixico and others who were, really so knowledgeable about the subject. I've just learned more and more and more, and just new resources of, as I learn of one resource, then it would lead to another and another, and so it was just lots of fun.
Okay. If anyone else has any more questions, I think we have time for a few more. You can put them in the Q&A or the chat. Another question that came in, as a teaching tool, LaVonne kind of mentioned this. Would this be beneficial to students in the Florida or Texas area? And will you be marketing the book to that audience?
I would be, but definitely yes. I think I really just feel other kids probably feel shortchanged to not know so much of the rich history of our country, and I just really feel that it's just so excellent that these resources exist now, and I think that every child deserves to know these stories, and I'm pleased to be able to provide one of them.
In my blurb, I said I thought it should be in every elementary and middle school library. Depending upon the reading level, younger readers can read it as well, but it's particularly, I think, designed for middle school readers. But that should be in the school libraries.
Absolutely. And we have a couple copies on order here at our library.
Good.
And I want to echo what everyone said. Glennette, thank you for writing this book, because it's just, the subject is just not so well known as it should be. And I don't recall really learning much about it myself in school. So thank you for writing this book. And I don't see any more questions, so I think that might be a good place to stop. But thank you both so much for taking the time to be here tonight to share your expertise with us. So do you have any other ending remarks before we say goodnight?
Just thanks to Glennette for taking the time to do the research and to make a really fine book.
Thank you very much for your role you played, LaVonne.
Thank you both so much. Thank you to Abrams Publishing and the Bookstore of Glen, Ellyn. We will share a link of where you can purchase the book in the follow-up email with the recording.
Postscript. There's another book called South to Freedom that is an adult nonfiction book that has been an award-winning book this year. And I really think that reading groups or lit clubs, literature groups would really enjoy reading both these books in tandem, adult readers, and then, of course, younger readers. Their book clubs would enjoy the John Horse book.
Definitely.
Of course.
So go out and check out the book or buy it, but definitely take a look and read that. So thank you both so much, LaVonne and Glennette, for being with us tonight, and have a wonderful night, everyone.